Joining us now over the phone is Colin Blunstone of The Zombies. The Zombies will be performing at City Winery in Boston on March 3rd and March 4th coming up. Colin, thanks so much for speaking with me over the phone.
Well, it's a real pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
So I want to start off the interview by offering my condolences for the passing of Jim Rodford.
Well, thank you very much for that. I mean, it's been a huge shock to us, obviously. There was an accident in his house, and I was talking to him on the phone the day before, and I got the news first thing in the morning what had happened. It's been a huge shock, and he's such a wonderful person, as well as being a great player. I mean, he's irreplaceable, and we can't get another Jim Rodford, but we decided that we were going to just soldier on, and we started to next week in America, and we've found a wonderful bass player who actually comes from Denmark. He's coming over from Denmark at the end of this week to rehearse with us, and it's going to be very interesting playing with him. He knows the Zombies repertoire better than the Zombies do. He really knows his stuff, and it's going to be very sad, but we'll all plow on and put all our energies into making this next tour a huge success, and it can be a celebration of Jim's life, and we'll be dedicating the shows to him.
He had been with the Zombies or around the Zombies since the very beginning.
That's absolutely true. He's actually Rod Argent's cousin, and he's a little bit older than Rod, and Jim was in the top local band where we come from, St. Albans in Hertfordshire, and Rod went along to see Jim Rodford play in his band. They were called the Blue Tones, and he loved it so much that right at that minute he decided he wanted to have a band of his own, and Jim helped him put that band together, and that band became known as the Zombies. Jim came to our very first rehearsal. He helped us. We used the amplifiers from his band in our first rehearsal, and he helped us set everything up. And actually, Rod did ask him to join our band, but he very sensibly said, well, I'm in the big local band, so why would I want to join a band that's just starting? And it took us a long time to get Jim into the band. That was 1961, our first rehearsal. And this incarnation of the band came together in 1999, and Jim was there at the very first rehearsal of this version of the Zombies, along with Rod Argent, and Jim's son, Steve Rodford, is the drummer and has been for the last 19 years. So it's always been quite a family band, because Rod was Jim's cousin and Steve Rodford is Jim's son. And obviously he's going to be very badly missed.
Little did he know that 30 years later or something, he would be in the Zombies when he originally said no.
I know. It's really strange how things work out, but we'd always play together. All the guys from St. Albans always play together. Jim Rodford had been on a lot of my solo records. I've been making solo records as well as being in the Zombies, and Jim and Rod and Steve Rodford have been on my solo albums. And of course, Jim Rodford and Rod Argent are founder members of Argent, who went on to have a lot of big hits. Jim was also, for 20 years, he was in the Kinks. He's played with the Animals, the Swinging Blue Jeans, many, many bands. He's one of those guys that just everybody wanted to have him in their band because he's just such a great player.
Speaking of your solo career, originally when the Zombies disbanded, you released a few singles under a different name?
I did. I wasn't sure if I had to leave the music business, because when the Zombies finished, especially the non-writers, the way the business is set up, just in general in the music business, writers have a completely separate income stream. And so Rod Argent and Chris White were in a very different situation to the other founder members of the Zombies, myself, Hugh Grundy, and Paul Atkinson. And we all had to get jobs. We were absolutely flat broke. We didn't earn any money on the road, alongside most bands in the 60s. It wasn't just us. So sadly, I had to leave the music business, and it was about a year after the Zombies finished that Time of the Season went on to be a huge hit, one of the last tracks. That was actually the last track we ever recorded. And with that success in America, a lot of people started approaching me to record again. And one producer was called Mike Hurst, and he just recorded some great tracks, early tracks with Cat Stevens. And I loved those tracks, and so it encouraged me to get back in the studio. And Mike had this idea of changing my name. I'm not really quite sure why, but I wasn't sure that I was going to... I'd been so devastated by the winding up of the original Zombies. I wasn't sure I wanted to get back into the business. And so I started recording in the evenings after I finished my day job, and I assumed this false name. But one of the tracks that we recorded was a small hit in the UK, and so I suddenly found myself thrust back into the music business, and any indecision that I'd had about playing in the business again was taken away, because having a small hit, I didn't have any choice really. I was suddenly back in the business, and I always wanted to be in the music business. It's just that I wasn't sure that the music business wanted me to be in the music business. But with that hit, I took that as a sign of acceptance, and started out on my career as a solo artist.
Yeah, and you released several solo albums in the 70s, notably the album 1 Year.
Yeah, I mean, it was really successful, actually. Unfortunately, it wasn't successful in America. And this is something you have to learn as an artist, that when you go from territory to territory, say, different countries in Europe or America or the Far East, that people know you for totally different songs. And it's very important that you find out what songs have been successful and what songs haven't been successful. In the UK, I had several hit records that weren't hits in America, and it paved the way for a relatively successful solo career, which goes on till today. When I come back from America in April, I just sort of change hats, so to speak, and I start touring with my solo band, and we play a completely different set to the set that we'll be playing with the Zombies. So I have at least two different careers that I keep try and keep as current as possible.
When you're putting together the set list for the Zombies shows, there's such a big catalog of so many great songs. How do you go about putting that set list together?
Well, I think that there's a backbone of songs that people expect us to sing. And then we always try and play some songs from our latest album. And our last album actually charted in Billboard. For the first time as the Zombies, we charted in Billboard. I think it's the first time in 50 years. So that was a wonderful surprise.
Wow.
And there was big celebrations when that happened. Billboard actually phoned us to tell us, for the first time as the Zombies, you're in the charts. And so we'll play some songs from the new album, and then just some favorites that we've played over the years. And the set comes together fairly easily if you just think of it in those terms. The backbone of the hits: She's Not There, Time of the Season, Tell Her No, I Love You, maybe a couple of others that were smaller hits. And then some new songs, and suddenly you've got a set.
I saw the Zombies perform Odyssey and Oracle a couple of times in Boston, and I remember you told a story about one of the songs on the new album that you quoted the song Yesterday by the Beatles and needed permission from Paul McCartney.
That's right. It's one of the songs on the album. We just did a little reprise at the end, using two lines of the melody of, and actually the lyric as well. And I think we're kind of lucky. I don't really know how this came about, but Rod's brother-in-law works exclusively with Paul McCartney, so that may have helped. He's a recording engineer and called Steve Orchard, and he works exclusively for Paul, and that may have helped because the record company and the publisher of the Beatles are very much against anybody using any clips from the Beatles. It's very vigorously policed, but McCartney actually interceded on our behalf and said, look, it's a great song, it's fine. And we were extremely fortunate, because otherwise I think the album would have been stopped, and may have taken months to sort that out. But I think we've learned our lesson, and we'll probably stay. It was very, very kind of McCartney to help us, but we'll probably stay away from that area in future. We're all huge Beatles fans. That's why we used it, because we just think the Beatles and McCartney as a solo artist, they're just so breathtakingly wonderful, and that's the only reason that we would have taken that slight liberty.
When you were recording Odyssey and Oracle, did you have much interaction with them? Because it was recorded at Abbey Road Studios.
We were very unlucky in that they left Abbey Road about 2 or 3 days before we were the next band in.
Oh.
and they just left. They'd finished Sgt. Pepper, and although we didn't hear anything of Sgt. Pepper, but they had just finished it as we went in, and we were actually picking up percussion instruments on the floor, tambourines and maracas and so forth, that they had left. So it was, we were always huge Beatles fans, so it was a big thrill for us. And actually, we used the Mellotron that they left behind. I'm not sure if we were supposed to, but we did. And if you listen to Odyssey and Oracle, there's so much Mellotron on that album. And if the Beatles hadn't left their Mellotron behind, we probably wouldn't have used Mellotron. It just happened to be there.
Wow.
So that's kind of as close as we got to them. It was unfortunate. I would have loved to have met them, but we just missed them.
When you went into the studio to record that album, it ended up having such a huge impact on pop music for years to come. And it was the first Zombies studio album that you were going in to record a full length.
We did actually record one other album when we very first got together. But it was a very thrown together affair. I think Decca Records, who were with us at the time, probably took them a bit by surprise that we had a big international hit record with She's Not There. And in those days, the industry was very much dominated by singles, and they only thought about albums as an afterthought. When She's Not There was a hit single, Decca suddenly said, okay, we need an album. And it was recorded probably in about 2 evenings. And it's a bit patchy, to be honest. It's called The Zombies Begin Here. And it was recorded very, very quickly. Odyssey and Oracle was our effort. It was really a way of the Zombies producing themselves. There was no outside producer as such in the studio. It was mostly, for the most part, it was produced by Rod Argent and Chris White, the two main songwriters in the band. And the idea was that we would try and get our songs recorded in a way that we wanted them recorded, rather than in the way an outside producer saw those songs. But again, it was recorded very quickly. By now we're with CBS Records, and they gave us £1,000 to record the album, and even in those days that was not a lot of money. We got round it by rehearsing extensively before we went into the studio so that we could record very quickly, and in a day we would probably have recorded a couple of tracks completed in a day. We had to, we just had to record very quickly. And of course we were recording in Abbey Road, which was one of the most expensive studios in the country, if not in the world. So in some ways, we'd chosen to do it the hard way. We got the benefit of the wonderful engineers at Abbey Road. Mostly, we were recording using the same engineers that the Beatles used. Jeff Emerick and Peter Vince recorded Odyssey and Oracle, and also recorded Sgt. Pepper. So we were getting the benefit of these wonderful engineers, but we were clock watching, because we had such a small recording budget that, as I said, we had to just rehearse really extensively and then get in the studio and record extremely quickly.
Do you think the outcome or the sound of the album would have been different if you had had unlimited time?
Well, it probably would have. I mean, it's not always the disadvantage that you might think to have that discipline of having to record quickly. Providing you're rehearsed before you go in, I think it can be quite a good thing. It gives an album an energy that it wouldn't have if you had an unlimited budget. I can't say how it would have ended up if we'd have had more time. It may have been better, but it may not have been. It may have been weaker if we'd have had more time. It definitely gives you an energy when you know you've got to get it first or second time.
Talking about the early music of the Zombies, it almost sounds like there's a jazz influence with Rod Argent's keyboard playing and the chords that he was using. Can you talk a little bit about the early influences of the group?
Absolutely. I think that one of the strengths of the Zombies was also, in an ironic way, one of the weaknesses, that we took our musical influences from such a wide spectrum of music, from classical music through modern jazz to the blues, rhythm and blues, rock and roll, and pop music. It's all there if you listen for it. And I think that was a real strength, in that it gave us a quite individualistic sound. The downside of that is that in the music industry, people like to be able to categorize you. And the Zombies are very difficult to categorize, and that can be a weakness, because it can make radio stations reluctant to play you when they can't categorize you. It's unfortunate, but it's true. But certainly, the Zombies, whether you like them or you didn't like them, they were certainly different. And I think that's a lot to do with the fact that we took our influences from such a wide spectrum of music.
And when you say rehearsing before Odyssey and Oracle, were you coming up with the arrangements of what the songs were going to sound like, or was it just drilling the songs over and over again so the band really knew them tight?
We were coming up with the arrangements so that by the time we got into the studio, the keys were set, the arrangements were set. We were just looking for the performance. And we were playing them over and over again, not for weeks and weeks, but we were familiar with the songs. For the most part, we were familiar with the songs when we went in the studio. I mean, one exception I do remember is Time of the Season. The song was finished in the morning before we recorded it in the afternoon at Abbey Road. And I mean, I've told this story many times, that I wasn't completely familiar with the melody, particularly the phrasing of the song. I mean, we always, Rod and I always work hard at the phrasing of the song, whatever we're working on. And quite famously, we had a huge argument in the studio, me in the studio and him in the control room. And he was trying to very patiently guide me through the phrasing. And because I had a huge clock right in front of me, and I knew we were running out of time, and as I've said before, we didn't have a big recording budget, I guess performance anxiety was getting on top of me, and I started to snap at him, and then he started to snap back at me. And I've always thought it's amusing that while I'm singing, it's the time of the season for loving.
Right.
Rod and I were having a very fierce argument with the worst language you can imagine, as we started to lose it because we were running out of time to record this track. But eventually we did get it. I remember saying to Rod, listen, I'm shouting through an intercom, so it's not as if I'm having a quiet conversation with him. Anyone in the control room can hear this. And I'm sort of saying words to the effect of, you know this song so well, you come in here and you sing it. And he's shouting back to me, you're the bloody lead singer. You stand there till you get it right. And this is at the top of our voices. And all the time it's the time of the season for loving. And there's a background of verbal abuse going on. It was soon forgotten. And we ended the session. We nipped round to the pub round the corner and toasted the end of the completion of the album.
How was it with Rod's or Chris's songs, singing them? Did you have difficulties in other songs getting the phrasing or the lyrics how they wanted them?
Not usually, no. I think that particular one, the problem was a lack of time. It's just that it had really just been written. It's the last song that was written for the album. So usually I find their songs comparatively easy to sing. And particularly over the last 20 years, I've been performing a lot of Rod songs. And Rod always says that he learned to write songs from my voice. And in the same way, I learned to sing professionally, singing Rod songs. So he would always say that, he writes, he can hear my voice subconsciously at the back of his mind. He can hear my voice when he's writing. And so they feel quite natural to me when I come to sing them. And we will, even now, before the band hears the songs, Rod and I will work on them just around the piano, just him and me, so that by the time we play it to the band, I'm completely familiar with what I have to do. But, we never throw these vocals together. They're always discussed and rehearsed quite extensively before we introduce the band to a new song.
Yeah, it makes sense that he would write the songs with your voice in mind. Similarly, maybe Pete Townsend would have written the songs for The Who with Roger Daltrey in mind.
I'm sure he does. Whether it's consciously or subconsciously, I'm sure he does, yes. And for Rod and I, the phrasing is very important. With Rod's songs, it's never, this is roughly how the song goes. You put your twist on it, or your interpretation on it. That's not how we work. We sit down and we discuss the phrasing really line by line. And it's quite time-consuming, but I think it's worth it. I really think it's worth it. And I just get that phrasing set in my mind. And hopefully that gives the song a little extra something.
Well, like I mentioned, the Zombies are going to be performing in Boston on March 3rd and March 4th, 2 shows, at the new venue, City Winery. One last question for you, Colin. This might be a difficult one, but is there one track on Odyssey and Oracle that you enjoy performing the best?
There's probably a few, but I do like This Will Be Our Year, because I know it's a special song for people. It's a song that people choose to have at weddings. And so I can often see people's faces light up when we play This Will Be Our Year. And it is a beautiful song. It's a great song to sing, and it's got a very meaningful lyric. And so that would be a special one.
All right, Colin, thanks so much for speaking with me, and good luck with the upcoming tour.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. All the very best.